Could you tell me your full name and rank for the microphone?
Yes. At the time I was in, it was Mary A, and I entered the course as an Airman Basic
Mm-hmm.
Standard. And when I was discharged, I was a Staff Sergeant.
Could we go back and then talk a little bit about your earlier life? So you said you were born in Washington D.C. Is that where you lived primarily?
Yes. Yes. My dad was in the Marine Corps during World War II, and he met my mom at a USO in DC, and she rode him throughout the war, and they came home. He came home, I should say, and married and raised the family there. And he also stayed in the military for in the Army National Guard. He was in the Marine Corps in World War II. Uh, so he was originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and he met my mom. And really, he was an orphan, and so they talked about it, and he goes, "Well, there's really nothing for me to go back there to." So he got a job and was in the Army National Guard as in his capacity as a guardsman, but he also worked there. So it was kind of like a double duty. It was called Camp Sims, SIMS, and that is where he worked. Oh, till all of us were all grown. It was we would go up and visit him. Every Thursday evening he had drill, so he taught me how to stitch shine shoes. Would help me, I would help him with his uniform. He would make sure everything was clean, uh,
Right,
ranking
right.
was where it should be, everything polished, looked good. And he would tell me stories about what it was like when he was in the military during World War II. He was a cook in the Pacific, and it just triggered something that this is something I want to do.
And so
And
you were interested in serving from a young age, would you
oh,
say?
from a very young age, yes, very young. Um, at that time, mid 60s, there really wasn't a lot. You could go to be a nurse, you could go to be a secretary. It really wasn't much else, and I really didn't have any desire to get married. Um, so I decided to go in the military, and he was for it. My father was. My mother, not quite so much. There was a bit of a rift there for 6 months or so until she reconciled herself to the fact that, yeah.
So this was out of high school. You'd say that you enlisted.
I think, let's see, I graduated June. It would have been, I think I had a job maybe 6, 8 months. And I went in January 66 and was discharged in May of 68. Because at that time, when I went in the Air Force, my father cautioned me about going in the Marines. Didn't want to really do Army. I can swim. I get seasick, so I loved flying. So Air Force was it. And at that time, it was WAF, WAF, Women in the Air Force. We were a separate entity, had our own chain of command and our own ranking. So that's how I was able to get such a high rank in such a short period of time. Plus, I was very smart. But anyway, um, and I wanted to do something in the medical field. I wanted to be a doctor, but at that point in time, that was really out of my league. So I went in, and they basically I got that education that would be equivalent to a LPN. So it was a fabulous time. I enjoyed it. Wish I could have stayed longer. Circumstances were not in my favor.
What was the training like? Did you stay in the U.S. for a period of time after that?
They weren't really sending women overseas. The first thing you do, I took my oath in Baltimore, Maryland. That was the closest spot. That's where all the recruits were being gathered to. Then we were loaded on a plane and flew down to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. First time I had a cocktail on a plane, so that that was really interesting. So it's nothing like arriving at basic training at 4 o'clock in the morning and you're just a little loopy. But
I'm
Texas in
sure.
January is beautiful. And we were outside getting our gear off the bus and everything, and it's the middle of the night and it's warm. I'm from the East Coast, so that doesn't usually happen. So I was there at Lackland till June, because you have basic training, and then I was shipped. I think it was March, April. Let's see, basic would have been 6 weeks. So January, sometime around the 1st of March, we were then transferred up to Burke Burnett, Texas, which was Shepherd Air Force Base. That was secondary training. And
And what was second? What was the purpose of
secondary was
secondary?
training was for whatever MOS military job you were going to have. Some went other places. Some of the other women went to secretarial school. Um, some did other medical. I was the only one that went to Shepherd for that particular LPN classing, which is basically I could work anywhere in the hospital. So I was the only female in the class. The instructor told me don't come to class anymore with skirt on because we weren't allowed to wear slacks to class because I was distracting him. I was the only woman in the class and he refused to call me by my name. I was George. Uh, yeah, this is what it was like. Honest to God truth. So I had a name tag that said George, and he must have contacted my CO or whatever, and I was issued a pair of slacks, tailored. That was the other thing. When we got to basic, all of our uniforms were tailored. We had classes on makeup and hairstyle, how to walk, how to talk, how to carry ourselves.
After you finished this secondary training, what was your posting? So you at this point you were specialized in like the medical the
Yeah, it was. I was basically under a command of a registered officer, registered nurse who was an officer. So I could work in wards. I worked in the emergency room. I went out on ambulance runs, just anything. And they actually, I vaguely remember signing something that said, yeah, I'll work nights, which I really liked doing. I like being up at night. Didn't realize that in doing that, that let me out of all kinds of drills and inspections during the day that everybody else had. Yeah, that June I came home for my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. That was the first leave I had after I left the previous 6 months to go to service. And in all the big wedding picture of the family and the grandkids and everything, my grandmother asked me if I would wear my uniform. And I said, are you sure? Not a fun time to be walking around in a military uniform. In fact, when I flew back home, I flew into Andrews Air Force Base, which was the closest one. And at that time, family only had one car. My dad was at work. So I got off the base or got a cab and went home. And the driver's haranguing me, what's a pretty little girl like you doing in a uniform? Don't you know that the only whores are the ones in the military? And I said, well, sir, I'm not, you know.
and
Yeah.
and you were being you said there was a lot of harassment by people criticizing the military
Right.
or women in the
Criticizing
military.
the military and especially women in the military. Now, this was in the middle of Vietnam. So there was still, you got your draft dodgers, guys were burning their draft cards. I told my brother, I said, don't you dare go to Canada. I'm in, you're safe, don't worry about it. He was 4 years younger than me. That was the other reason I really wanted to go in. I didn't want to see him drafted. He was a
And
sensitive
so
soul.
you enlisting was an alternative because they'd
Well, I
only.
thought if the family already had one with that many children, perhaps he could get a deferment. And he was never um, called up. His number was never called.
Mm-hmm.
So it worked up to a certain point. Yeah. Uh, so when I got to going back to the cab ride, and I gave the cab driver the address, and he dropped me off at my grandparents, and He said, I want you to go in there and I want you to take that uniform off and burn it. I said, sir, I'm property of the U.S. government. I cannot do that. Well, I don't want your money. I just want you to do that. Promise me you'll do that. And he's going, finally I said, so I think I threw, $5, $10, whatever it was, on the seat, turned around and walked into my grandparents' house. I was so mad. Well, for the past 6 months, I kind of been sheltered on base. Yeah, I've been working in the hospital, but it's a military hospital, so I'm not really exposed to aliens. Yeah, we had time off and everything. There's a lot. You really just wanted to sleep rather than go into party because you knew you had to be, you know, back the next morning to your grind. So we had the pictures for my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary, and I was in my uniform, and um, it's probably one of the proudest moments. And I love my nana. She was a Spitfire. She was Irish, and so from there I went back. I already had my orders. That's right. I was going to be stationed in Montgomery, Alabama. Um, yeah.
So
Not a
big,
nice.
big, big shift of scenery, I'd assume.
Yeah, yeah, big ship. It was a huge hospital. It was that time. It was the where we trained other countries' air pilots. So it was a huge place.
This was during the height of the Vietnam War,
Hmm.
and you were in the U.S. But what was did you have any exposure to people coming home from the war? And you said that you were harassed at points by the cab driver, notably. And so, what was your did you have a lot of friends that went off to the war in Vietnam, or
Yes, I had dated a few guys that had gotten sent over there. Now you got to remember the Air Force is probably one of the last ones to go in. What I did have as exposure to Vietnam was I took care of the ones that were, we called them the Walking Dead. Um, Whatever they had seen there, and they're physically they were fine, mentally they were gone. So these are young men that I should have been dating. I'm washing, dressing them, feeding them, nothing. They were catatonic.
so completely this was no physical damage or very little.
No physical damage. I mean, they may have, a busted leg or something like that, but mm-mm. And they were assigned, that hospital had a huge psychiatric ward, and I was assigned there. I got extra training to work with the psychiatric patients. So I would go in the morning, because at that time, then you had rotating shift. You did like a week or 10 days, 2 weeks on one shift, and then you switch to the next one, and then the next one, and then, you have a day off or so in between. But you're pretty much working. And so that really, I went in as a hawk, very much for the war. Yeah, yeah, yeah. When I was discharged, I was very much a dove. I saw the consequences of what was happening over there, really. Not filtered through the news, not filtered through the official press releases, not filtered through the chiefs of staffs. I saw the damage.
And so a
So,
lot of these men were young draftees into the army, and
well, they would have been Army, Air Force. It it really didn't matter if there wasn't an army hospital that was close by, and they tried to send them somewheres where their relatives, family could visit them. They were hoping that this perhaps would spark something, or they could bring them back. They used to call it shell shock in
right.
World War I and II, um, and it just kind of made me step back and think and look and see. I mean, the people were fabulous. I made some nice friendships. Actually, ended up marrying someone who, that was a big mistake right there. Anyway, and was pregnant, and that's why I had to be discharged. At that time, any WAF, I think any military, I believe, female, married or not, pregnancy, as soon as the military knew about it, you were handed your papers. And 6 months later, an Air Force nurse challenged that and won. Now, well, at the same time, I also had orders for Okinawa. So I was really, really upset um, that
So
he
this
was
would have
that careless.
you would have been going over to Okinawa, which would have been receiving. I'm assuming you know uh, the soldiers right from Vietnam. That'd be the first.
Yes,
That would be the
right.
first stop.
Yeah, that would have been the first stop. Yeah, Okinawa, Japan. So um, let's see, where was I? Yeah, so it really kind of made me stop and think and look and just kind of get, okay, let's get a little more facts here. Taking care of these guys. And there would be times that I would leave my shift and just go back to the barracks and bawl because you just needed a release. You didn't cry in front of them. You were nice, you were cheerful, you were helpful, you were doing your job, but at the same time, it took a mental toll. I know there were quite a few nurses and LPNs, and we were called corpsmen, um, that were on drugs simply to get you through the day. So, drugs in the military is not a new thing. Probably goes all the way back to George Washington at Valley Forge. So,
And is there any particular story, any man that you got to know their story of what happened, what was the cause of their trauma?
yeah. mm, okay, after all this time, and I don't need name, a lot of them were in a foxhole or minding their own business, and the next thing they know, they're the only one alive, and all six of their buddies are laying beside them, blown to pieces. That does something to someone. And a lot of them were very young, like I said, 18, 19, 20 years old. I think I had one that was 17. He had lied about his age. We found that out. Um, yeah, you didn't want to get too close to them because after a certain point, maybe the family wanted to take them out and transfer them closer to home, or they were put in another place, another ward. So that was kind of the cardinal rule number one. And in fact, after I years later, I went ahead and got my RN, and that's the first rule. You really don't get emotionally involved with your patients. For your own
Right.
sanity, you can't.
And so a lot of these men, did they? Do you know if most of them went on after a year or 2 years and went on to resume relatively normal lives? Of course, with the
I
trauma
would
still
not
there.
think after a year or two, if anything, all right, that would be my age now. So maybe within 25 years, as psychiatry advanced and drugs to help people pull people out of this, more understanding. Well, it was their own fault. They shouldn't have been there. That kind of an attitude was very prevalent everywhere.
Right.
So if you get hurt, it's your own fault. Why didn't you go to Canada? Well, maybe I really don't want to go to. I really do want to go fight for my country. And you have to remember, and if you've done any in-depth analysis of this, a lot of the people who were drafted were poor, black, high school dropouts. You didn't have college students, and if you had high school seniors, they got deferment of some sort or other.
So it was you think it was very targeted towards these.
Yes, I do. I do. Not necessarily targeted, but they were, as we used to say, cannon fodder.
Right.
I think that term originates back in the Napoleonic Wars, but it's very true. However, there was quite a few things that did good come out of Vietnam. I don't know if you know anything about mast pants, capital M, capital A, capital S, capital T.
I do not.
Okay, they are what they would put on the guys that were injured in the field and brought back on the aircraft. And basically, what they were was a vacuum. Um, they were a pair of pants that you would lay down, but they were rubberized, and inside they had air sacs. You could blow these up, and it would stabilize the spine and the lower limbs. It would stop bleeding. Uh, they eventually were used in civilian EMT um, and ambulance services. Uh, More drugs that were faster acting. A lot of your high blood pressure medications nowadays can trace their roots back to that. Um, and there's a couple of other things I'm trying to remember. I did, like I said, I did quite a few papers on this in my um, nursing training that I had here because I had this vast experience.
Right.
It wasn't blessed by the civilian government. So my instructors in nursing school, they just, hey, come on, you can come up and teach this. No, I'm not going to teach this. I'm here to learn. However, I can add something to this that maybe you would not know of because you're not military.
Right.
And for the longest time after I had my daughter, remarried, got a job, and was working a lot. I didn't tell a lot of people that I was a veteran, probably close to 30 years. It just wasn't something that was done. People
What was the reason for that?
people looked at you differently, especially being a female. Oh, you went in to find a man. You know, you like to play loose. No, no,
So it was
no.
looked at as kind of,
Yes,
amoral in a way.
amoral. Women in World War II, that was fabulous. They ground for us. They were pioneers. Now that we have women in every service, every field in every service, even submarines nowadays, it's like I can look back and think, okay, I had a little bit to, I stuck it out. I did it, did my job, what I was supposed to do. And yeah, it's a feeling of pride. And it's interesting because my husband, if we're out somewheres and I have my um, veterans cap on, people will come up to him and thank him, shake his hand and thank him. And he
Right.
looks at him, he goes, I'm not the fucking veteran. She is. Shake her hand. She's wearing the cap. Oh, he gets so upset. So upset. And a little aside, last November we were overseas on a riverboat cruise, and on Veterans Day we were going to be visiting the American Cemetery in Luxembourg. Beautiful place, small cemetery, but just gorgeous. And I wore my cap, and I had so many men come up, shake my hand. Actually, that cruise I think had more veterans than I had ever seen. I think there was 11 of us or 13, and they were, I think, 4 or 5 women and the rest were men. But the men come up, where did you serve? What were you doing? You know, and I said, well, where's your cap? My wife doesn't want me to wear it. I said, I'm sorry. Ask your wife. You're a veteran. Wear it. Duh. Um, I don't know if you've ever gotten to Washington, D.C. to see have you seen the nurses monument? It's a little further away. They're tending to a wounded soldier. They're in the field. One is looking skyward for helicopter. One is taking care of the guy. She has him across his lap. The other one is down below trying to get medical supplies, telephone. I don't remember. That figure is to the back, more or less. And my husband and I went there. We saw the wall and we saw that. And I'm standing there, I'm bawling. And this gentleman comes up and he goes, were you a nurse? And I said, yes, I was. Can I hug you? He said, I had a nurse that took such good care of me. I don't remember her name. He said, but I come here kind of like every day. I just hoping I can maybe meet her again. Well, so I'm looking at my husband. He's going, I don't care. Go ahead, hug the guy. Well, he gave me such a bear hug. And he's whispering, thank you, thank you, thank you. You saved my life. You saved my life. And it's like, oh my gosh. It kind of made up for all the years that I had to hide what I did. If you've ever been there, go to the Women's Memorial. It's over at Arlington. Oh, I'm a charter member of that, so that means I've contributed. We were there when it was open. We had I did something with the rest of the ladies, and to see 250,000 women veterans marching, it was. Absolutely. Freaking amazing.
I,
I
I,
kind of
I'm
needed.
I'm so glad that I think there's much more recognition
There is
today.
nowadays, yes, absolutely. And when I started dating my husband, he's one of 12 children. So we would go to family houses, Sunday evening, come on up, have supper, stay and play games, whatever. And the one brother had a son, and he found out I was in the military. So he'd grab me. He was maybe 10, 11 years old when I came into his life. And he goes, Mary, come on, I want to talk with you. Come on into my bedroom. What did you do? How was this? What do you think of that? He ended up going in the Air Force. His sister, my husband's sister's daughter, our niece, she went in the Air Force, and they both acknowledged what I had told them, encouraged them to go in.
Wow.
Now, my own daughter never expressed a desire. I didn't force it. Yeah, none of my brothers or sisters went in, and I think one of my husband's brothers, younger brother, went in the reserve for I think a year or two, and then something happened and he was discharged. So um, his dad was in the Army Air Corps, my husband's father. So we were both raised in a military household.
Right.
Um, and it didn't seem to really take, but that's all right. I'm I'm glad of what I did. It's something that I would do again in a heartbeat. Go back
Of
in.
course.
Yeah, and I started to say after my daughter was born and I got the clearance and everything, I went back to the recruiter and I said, okay, this is what happened. It's been changed now. Can I come back in? He goes, are you your child's only support? And I went, yes. He goes, nope, no,
Ah.
no, no dependent children. I went, oh, for crying out loud, guys, really? She turned 18. I went back again. He goes, oh, you just missed it by a year. You're too old.
Oh.
He goes, you've been back before. I said, yeah. What do I have to do to get back in the military? I mean, and he's laughing. It was a very nice black recruiter. I mean, he had a fruit salad all over his chest. That's what they call ribbons and everything. I don't know if you're familiar with that term or not. And he goes, come on, let's just sit down and talk. So I think we went out and had a cup of coffee or something. And he goes, I would love to re-enlist you. He said, you are the type of person we want back in here. He said, but we do have requirements. I said, yeah, I know. I said, it was one of those lifetime opportunities. I took it and it was snatched from me, and never get it back. Speaking of taking care of veterans, because I went in under my maiden name, I was discharged under my married name, and I have divorced and married and remarried since then. I cannot get into VA because I can't prove I was in, because the name of my DD 214 discharge papers is different from the one that's on my driver's license.
I want to see if you more information on this. It seems like the VA, especially with Vietnam veterans, there seems to be a lot of Vietnam veterans are very dissatisfied with the service that's being done. But I'm not really familiar with what's being done. So what
Well, I
was going
know
on?
that for a long time, VA did not have any female doctors, OBs, you know, gynecologists. You got a guy.
Right.
Um, there was a lot of sexual trauma. I don't know if you've been exposed to sexual military trauma, male and female. That was rampant when I was in. Um, Probably still is. Um, I would like to avail myself of that. My husband goes, absolutely not, as long as, and he was a fire lieutenant on the Milwaukee Fire Department for 30 years. So we have fairly good insurance. I'm on Social Security now. I think it's just the idea there was one more thing I was cheated out of.
It almost seems like they're looking for ways to not help veterans more than.
Bingo. Well, they finally admitted Agent Orange. Uh, I have an ex-brother-in-law who was in Nam, and he is now got, I forget what kind of cancer. He was exposed to Agent Orange.
Right.
Um, I know a few of the other men that I've met along the way that were non-vets. As far as I know of, well, one has a skin condition, but I don't really know for sure if that's due for exposure there. Other one seems to be okay. Now, God bless my husband. We go anywhere, and if there's any kind of a veterans booth or whatever, or just uh, go someplace, and there's people talking. Oh yeah, here vets over here. I'll just wander over, and I'm usually surrounded by guys. He. Oh, okay. That was one of the very first things I told him, and I said, I'm a veteran. I said, if you have a problem with that, let me know now before this goes any further, because we did have some sparks right away. And I was like, okay, I'm being really honest and upfront, and he knows some, um, probably more than anybody else. Um, and for the longest time, it's only been, well, let's see now, I'm 72. So I've been out 51 years. Yeah, my daughter's going to be 52 this December. Um, there were a lot of times where I had some rough spots. Fireworks. I couldn't go see fireworks for a while. PTSD. I have been diagnosed with it. Not simply because I was in battle, but because I saw the after effects of it. I did talk with a therapist for quite a while. I did do some testing long distance through the VA hospital in San Francisco, and they were conducting tests on veterans in Madison at the Veterans Hospital there, which is only like, what's Madison, 80, 90 miles away. So for 5 years, I went and had blood work drawn and cognitive testing, talk therapy. They did all kinds of scans, just to, they wanted to follow the veterans. I mean, now they're getting involved. Well, we're getting older. How can we truly prove that something happened 50 some years ago is affecting us now? We know a lot of this stuff, toxins and the heavy metals, are slow acting. Um, what's it going to be? I don't know.
World War II was, such a respected war when it was being fought. The men in it were very well respected. They fought an enemy that, it was
You
terrible. The battles were awful, but
you knew who your enemy was.
exactly. And
In Nam, your enemy could have been that little kid that's offering to shine your shoes.
exactly. And it's the same thing almost in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. And Iraq.
Right.
You don't. I know when the niece and nephew have been overseas, they have not been able to talk to it a lot. They let some things slip in front of me because they know I would understand. But they can't talk about it because of what they did and where they did it. Okay? And it's still going on.